Thanks everyone for being here. I started using Neo4j back in 2013, and I've kind of attended a bunch of the conferences since then. It's really cool to see the growth and see how many more people are attending these now. And it's really cool to see. So my name is David, and I'm a software engineer at Adobe. And I'm still kind of sad from the results of the worst data format from this morning. So my kind of goal now, and it wasn't originally, I kind of have to win back the audience. So I'm gonna try to do that. So I work for a part of Adobe called Behance, and I'm going to tell what that is in a minute. But I was responsible, me and a team that I worked with, for bringing Neo4j into Behance and Adobe as a whole. And I'm going to talk about our introduction of Neo4j to our tech stack, to production, to user-facing features, and then kind of talk about what life after initial implementation has been, and how I feel it's really helped us in terms of innovation and in terms of really opening our product to a new level. And so I was looking at kind of my title last night, and New Wave of Innovation. I was thinking it's a bit loaded, because innovation is kind of relative, I think, to what you're working on. So I've come to the realization, and there was great talks this morning, and there's going to be great talks later, that this isn't going to be the coolest use case that you see. There's some really cool ones. But what I think the value I could provide is talk about kind of the framework we've used to innovate on our product, and show how it directly impacts our users and their lives and their experiences on Behance. And I'm going to show a bunch of features that we built on top of Neo4j. At any point, you could pull out your phone, you could pull out your laptop, and you could go use it, and you could hit our Neo4j database just like our millions of users do. So I also encourage people to do that. It's kind of drives home the point. So this is a little bit what is Behance. We are a social network for creative people to post photography work, graphic design, really any visual kind of content. We have over 10 million members. We have millions of visitors each day, and we operate at a really big scale. We're kind of the de facto visual social network. And we kind of feed back into the Adobe ecosystem by showing, when people post work, what kind of visual tools they use to create it. Also, one thing I forgot to say on my opening slide is, if anything I show isn't clear and you have questions, you could just put your hand up, and I kind of like to do questions when the content is on the screen, or if it's not clear. So feel free to do that, and I'll try to spot you. Yeah, so that's kind of what we do, and we operate at that big scale. We're also kind of getting into learning, so teaching people how to use Adobe products. We have ways to do that. Yeah, and that's kind of what we are. So back in 2018 is when we brought Neo4j into Behance at Adobe, and this was our initial use case. And sorry, I'm using a laser pointer. I can't hit both screens, but there's a few things I'm going to need it for. So this is our initial activity feed, and what this is, this simply lets users follow these things we have called curated categories, which are categories of content that are curated by our professional curation team. You could also follow other users, so when they create a project, it shows up in your activity feed. And you could also follow some other stuff. One of them is called moodboards, which is actually a group of content that's curated by specific users. So they can make their own mood boards, and they add content to it. So back in 2018, this was fully powered by Cassandra. And the use case where we kind of decided to bring Neo4j in is our Cassandra architecture was kind of faltering for this use case. And I've kind of discussed this in previous talks and discussed this a lot, but I'm just going to quickly highlight kind of how this came to be. So our Cassandra architecture was using a strategy called a fan-out strategy for the activity feed. So it means for every activity feed item, for every user, we had to have a row in Cassandra. And this would be kind of similar for any relational database. So MySQL, you would probably structure this data exactly the same. So it's not to say this was a Cassandra issue, this was a data modeling issue, which is kind of important to drive home. So what did our actual Cassandra architecture look like? This is what was powering that activity feed. 48 Cassandra instances, very high powered machines, around 50 terabytes of data. So what does our Neo4j system look like? This is what's powering that activity feed right now. It's also powering about 5 new features, and it contains about 10 times the type of data that our Cassandra architecture did. And this is in production, operating at scale. So basically, kind of going back to what I talked about, a lot of the bloat there was due to the actual fan-out model that we used. We cut our data store when we switched to Neo4j from 50 terabytes to 50 gigabytes. Lots of cost savings on infrastructure, obviously, when we did this. Our user-facing features became even more compelling because we had this new data that we could easily surface, easily manage. We didn't need big backfills like we did in Cassandra. For instance, when a user signed up, we would have to populate their activity feed on the fly. We didn't have to do that anymore. We could just connect them to the data that was already in Neo4j. So it was really easy to do that. Basically, this is going to be the crux of my talk. The model that we had was very rigid, and the Neo4j model is flexible. And what I've kind of come to realize is that has allowed us to innovate after initial implementation. This was a big success, but it wasn't clear for us what the next steps were. We had Neo4j running, we had this activity feed running how it was before, so we kind of wanted to see really where we could take it. So shortly after our actual launch, we derived this new feature from our product team. And it seems pretty simple, and it really is. It's a different view of activity. It's projects just from people you follow. So it eliminates all the other content that I talk about in the feed, because this is a piece of content that we really wanted to show people. So we kind of built this little section right after. And this is something that was super simple in Neo4j, but we couldn't actually do when we had Cassandra. We couldn't query the data to produce this view. And this is something we were able to do in about a week in Neo4j and bring it to users. So this was really cool for us, an immediate kind of win from it. So let's look at kind of how Neo4j Graph made that possible. So you have a basic model, as you kind of probably would have expected, where a user could follow various entities that I talked about before. So you have these curated categories, which are like motion, photography, and tons of other categories. They could follow other users, and they could follow these entities called moodboards. So if we want to surface just content from other users, all we have to do is pick out this branch of the follows relationship, and we could easily produce that view without adding any additional data or needing to scale anything out. So let's look at kind of what the Cypher queries might look like. Yeah, so just let you look at this for a second. This is kind of simplified. We have a bit more complicated model, but you can see here, if I just want to get the general activity feed, I just look where they follow anything and where that did an action on a project. But then if I just want to, where they look at other users' stuff, all I have to do is hone in on this label user here, and I can produce that brand new view. So this was kind of the very first super simple example of how we were able to add a new feature. This isn't too compelling, but our users like this. It gives people's work more exposure to people who want to see it, and this was an important addition. So Cypher's flexible. Most people probably knew that, but how does that relate to product, and why is that important? First of all, it's not just flexible. We've proven that it's flexible at scale in production, as have a lot of other customers. So being flexible is one thing where you could kind of experiment and play around with it, but we take that, with very few changes or no changes and show it to our users at a high scale. So that's been really cool. It's encouraged innovation because product realizes that we have this data that's already available in Neo4j, that we don't have to run a long process to kind of migrate or figure out how to get it into and usable. Yeah, so when we were using Cassandra, we had basically no activity feed or improvements in that area of the site for about a year. And this kind of leads me to this last point here, and it's kind of a question. Do rigid data structures create a mindset and like culture of not innovating? And I really think they do. Because what happened with us in this case is we were just trying to keep our system running. We were just trying to keep our Cassandra cluster up, functional, and we kind of lost the ability for product to say, this is something we want to build on top of it. This is something we want to give to users. And that's kind of how I came up with this, that this has really helped us. So now I'm going to get into, I think, one of the cooler features we built on top pretty recently. So this is back in 2018. We introduced this thing called work in progress. It's similar to features on other platforms where you could post ephemeral content, which is content that only lasts a certain amount of time. So this content will disappear within 24 hours. What you do is you post projects that you might not feel comfortable having last forever, mainly because the quality might be lower. So creative people don't want to kind of share work that isn't finished. So the idea with this strip up here on our homepage is that it'll go away. And you could follow other users. We also have categories that show up here that might be interesting. But just show quickly. It's a cross-platform experience. So this is mobile. You can see here. This is one of the kind of cooler parts about it. You're able to give feedback to the person who created the work in progress, and you're able to react to it and tell them how you feel about it. And we found that creators really liked getting that on their projects. Also, I forgot to say before, just to be clear, this part yet is not in Neo4j. This was a feature we just built. So what kind of happened here is we launched this feature, and products like, we have a lot of these floating around. How do we drive more of these to users who might not see them? So what they wanted to do was build a recommendation algorithm to show works in progress to people who we think would be interested in that kind of work in progress. So there was a number of challenges in that process that I just want to highlight. And the main one being, for those who have done pipelines before for machine learning recommendations, is building an entire pipeline for content that's only there for 24 hours is problematic. Because you might come back, you have to build a model, you have to have the model update, and then you might come back to the user with works in progress that are gone, which is kind of useless. So that was one of the problems that we had with that approach. We had used Spark in the past to do a recommendation pipeline for our actual projects, which is I'll get into in a second. But here that wasn't going to work. We needed something that was near real time. So this seemed like a really good use case to build on top of Neo4j and kind of take advantage of the data we already had. So for this project, we were working with an Adobe remote research team that had actually built our other Spark pipeline for recommended projects. And they did really good on that project. But for this one, they were a little hesitant to use Neo4j. They were heavy algorithm people. They had never used Neo4j before. And we wanted to produce something good, so they were a little worried. So how do we kind of execute this? Well, we decided to use Neo4j for this process. We were able to use a lot of the data we already had. Since Cypher is intuitive, this team, who had pretty much just done Python when accessing Spark, they were able to pick up on it really quickly. One of my favorite parts about this is, in the end, they wrote a 61-line Cypher query to power our whip recommendations. And one of the coolest things there, I think, is it runs on demand. So you could download our app, you could log in, and you will see our whip recommendations powered by Neo4j. And this is something we couldn't really do we couldn't even think about doing with our old model in Cassandra or in anything else. Yeah, so just to show what this kind of looks like, you can see in the strip now we have this recommended section, and then on the actual website, you have the recommended part. And this shows up really forward in the feed, and you'll see why in a second. We've kind of bumped this to the front. And it shows all works in progress that we think you would be interested in. I'm not gonna get too into the algorithm, but it uses kind of some collaborative filtering, and it uses your tastes based on other projects you've liked and the creative fields that those fall into. We have kind of different categories like photography, motion that users could set on their projects. And then we only look at the pool of works in progress that are currently available. So you're not getting stale work. So you can see it's on mobile too, right near the front of what we show on works in progress. And part of the thing that I really want to drive home with this is, sure, this seems cool, but how do we know this made our users' life better? We're very into metrics. So I kind of showed earlier about whip reactions. For users that had access to whip recommendations, we saw a 20% increase in the amount of reactions they gave on works in progress. So that was a huge bump in one of the main metrics that we use to measure the success of this feature. So it told us that we were able to use Neo4j and kind of bring this recommended content to users, and they were loving it. They were seeing more content they wanted to see, and it was really good for a feature that we had worked very hard on. So we were happy about that. So just a quick kind of summary of this actual feature. They built this algorithm with no Neo4j experience. We were able to do rapid prototyping along the way, which is something that I've really liked about Neo4j, and it's kind of been discussed in like the previous talk. You could build proof of concepts really quickly, and that's definitely something that I've picked up on too. The key here is no pipeline. These are all generated on demand, so it's much more efficient. We saw our metric rise, and kind of I pose here something that I've learned when taking advantage of our graph is the most complex algorithm and pipeline might not always be the best solution. If we had built a full pipeline and figured out a way to do it, we could have potentially gotten slightly better recommendations, probably, but we wouldn't have been able to iterate quickly. We wouldn't have been able to bring it to users within about a month or two, and we wouldn't have been able to show progress as the research team was working on it. So this was really critical to making it successful. So kind of going back to the point of this, having the graph available gave our product team and gave our team the ability to actually create this feature relatively easily. So going back to our main experience, so this is what it looked like back in 2018. We kind of started building on top of this more with Neo4j and some other stuff that I mentioned. So this is recommended projects, and this is also built by our research team, and this is the one that uses a Spark pipeline to get in here. So this is actual projects, not works in progress. And then down here, you'll see we have the little section, new projects from people you follow. Then we also added this, which is just content from galleries you follow. And this started to become really fragmented. We were adding all these little views of the data because now we could, so it was kind of cool. But part of the problem was we started getting all these different sections and a really kind of fragmented experience in that regard. So the thought from product was, what if we put it all together into one kind of integrated feed where we called it like a smart feed, where we would be able to strategically decide how much content shows up for each type of following relationship we have. So this was something we wanted to do. For us in the past, any large scale like data view change would kind of be avoided at all costs by product, because they knew it took a ton of time, it required migrations, it required a lot of load testing, it generally required more database power. So a lot of there were a lot of dependencies, there used to be, to doing a massive change like this for our main user experience logged in. But now, based on the other kind of features we had built, there was this feeling that we could deliver this based on the graph and based on the ease of implementation we've had with the other improvements we made. So what we wanted here was a consistently scrollable kind of API with all three of those types in it. And we wanted it to be cross-platform, so we were going to use it on web, we were going to use it on mobile, and the idea is we'd be able to tweak that feed in one place and show results everywhere. So kind of where this went is how we would use Neo4j to kind of execute this with our data model. And the main goal here was we wanted to show more of those newly published projects from people you follow, because that's kind of the bread and butter, seeing projects from people that you want, and a lot of them in the other experience that became really fragmented, they were getting missed. We also wanted the ability to iterate really quickly, so we wanted to tweak slight prioritization of content, and we thought Neo4j would allow us to really do that. And then future flexibility, I'll talk about this in a minute, but we want to be able to, this is our main experience, this is our biggest logged in page, so we want to be able to really take this to the next level in the future, and we thought that it would give it to us. And kind of like I said before, the data already in Neo4j, so most of it was, so not very difficult. And then kind of Cypher really gives you the ability, as you've seen in previous presentations, to really write queries in the way that you want to write them, and be able to really make it algorithmic with the query language, which is what I love about it. So, as it might be expected, performance is extremely important on this page. It's our home page for logged in users, so it needs to load really quickly. And caching it is really, really hard because the data changes a lot. We want it to be able to change a lot because we want when people come on the site to see fresh content. So that was one of the requirements. I don't think it's, oh, sorry. Yeah, so this is kind of what it turned out as, our integrated feed experience. This is the actual page you see if you go on right now. This is our up-to-date kind of experience. So here we have newly published projects from people you follow, and everything is kind of integrated. So if you go here, we have a project from a mood board I follow. We have a project from someone I appreciate, and then we also have a recommended project. So those are mixed in there too. We don't derive the recommendations with Neo4j, but we're using it to display it and to figure out kind of how to page through this infinitely scrollable content feed. So this, same kind of like I said before, cross-platform experience on mobile. You have new, you have featured. You have your recommendations, new project. So this, kind of like the WIP recommendations project, allowed us to kind of find a lot of success in the actual optimizations we were doing with this experience. One of the things that's important here is not just that we saw this increase, this 10% overall increase in projects viewed, and we saw a 240% increase in views of new projects from people you follow, which is exactly what we wanted, but these numbers did not come right away, which is the important thing to kind of realize here. We had to iterate on the actual algorithm and change how we were prioritizing things, how we were grouping them together, and that was really effective to do with Cypher queries as opposed to some kind of pipeline or something that would be really rigid and hard to modify. So that was important for this project. So just quick summary of this project. Success through experimentation. Like I just said, we were able to try different things with this feed. Product was able to suggest different things they wanted to do, and we were able to really quickly execute it. This is core to our business. The actual percent of projects viewed on this homepage is really, really hard to move for us. That's like our key metric on it, and this allowed us to do that. Most of us believe that this would have been nearly impossible with our old system, dividing it into such a sub kind of complex view that we use in this feed now. So that wouldn't be. The cool thing that I kind of saw here was as we were developing this, our product team was coming up with future ideas as we put it together, because they knew that we could build quickly on this, and it kind of became a mindset of them, which was nice to see. So one of the things they asked is, in the future, can we deprioritize already seen items? So we're kind of planning to do that. It allows us to do that pretty easily. And then can we actually break down how much of each content we show to people based on their past behavior of what they view and what they like? And I think the graph lends extremely well to that. So these were all things that came up during actual development. And I think in the past, like, these are things that never would have been suggested, because we just would have been concentrating on, can we even, build some kind of crappy MVP for the actual feature. So it's neat to see that. Yeah, so kind of what I want to get into is applying this, like I said in the beginning, this is innovative for us, this impacts our end users, but how could other people take advantage of this for their use cases, and what's the general kind of strategy? And the first one is kind of obvious, and there's lots of people doing it, but be open to using a prod use case for Neo4j if it makes sense. Our experience, it scales great in prod. I've had that experience. You sort of have to be open to it, and it's a difficult sell sometimes to bring in a new technology. So that's one thing. The second thing is you have to take a lot of care when developing your data model. Pretty much all the stuff I say in this presentation is dependent on having a good data model. And I think that goes in general, like for any performance considerations or how much you could build on top of something, it's going to depend on how well you structure your model and how you plan ahead when doing that. So it's something to really take a lot of care in. So this was actually touched on really well in the previous talk about using Neo4j to build proof of concepts. That's how I sold it to Adobe. I built a proof of concept on my laptop with a full data set of our activity feed users, and it was really compelling. If you can run it on your laptop, it's going to probably run well on the pretty large servers we use to run it. So that's always good too. And then I like to think about how we could take pipelines and turn them into Cypher queries that could change an entire user experience with just a few modifications. And that, I think, is the beauty of Cypher and Neo4j in general. You'd be really surprised what could actually run on demand in a request. We expect a lot of performance from our app, and we're running a lot right on the request. If you create a Behance account and you see your activity feed, that's not cached. We don't cache it at all. It comes straight from Neo4j, and that's super performant. It's sub 100 milliseconds to load an entire infinitely scrollable feed, and it's been really really effective. And that's with fetching all like the supplemental data and all the like bunch of other data. Yeah, so the real value kind of in this experience that I've realized with this is it's been nice to see the product team focusing on innovating again and focusing on how to improve things for our users instead of worrying about what we can't do and whether the activity feed was going to topple over because of our old infrastructure, which we did have at times when we were running it like that. And now it's just pure, what's the next thing we could do? Yeah, and then like I said before, big pipelines, they aren't always better. They might produce slightly better results, but then going back to that, there's a real power to being able to change user experiences that easily. Yeah, so this kind of goes back to all the metrics that we're showing, and I don't think we'd be able to show a lot of these metrics if we weren't able to kind of tweak things so easily. Like there's things that product kind of it was like, oh, can we A/B test this? And the answer is generally yes, because all we have to do is duplicate a Cypher query, and we have an A/B test. Duplicating pipelines, as we did for our other recommendation, could be a lot harder, especially if you want a kind of substantial change to it. Now you might be running 2 models side by side, which we were for that, to do A/B tests. You might be running 3 models side by side. So with this, you're just duplicating a query, and it's kind of really efficient. Yeah, and then the last point here is kind of innovation spreading beyond the initial use case. So one of my favorite things about this is I brought in Neo4j, and I was one of the few people who used it at Behance and Adobe, and now we have a lot of other interests from other teams, and people in Behance itself are coming up with other use cases on their own independently of what we could use it for. So one of them is like user-facing statistics. We have a really bloated legacy system for that, so kind of bringing that to Neo4j and having using relationships to kind of calculate this data was one of the cool ones. But just kind of a cultural shift to actually thinking in graph. And the bigger cultural shift is people thinking about really how we could build on top of features that we never could have before, and that's been one of the biggest positives. Yeah, so that's all I really have. If there's any questions, I could take them now, or you're welcome to come up to me after if you want to talk about any of this. I'm happy to help.